Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Dating After Divorce podcast. I'm Shadi Curry. It's good to be here with you again this Monday morning. Today, I'm sharing with you a webinar that I did for my followers on email and social media. It was titled How to Heal Old Relationship Patterns So You Can Fall in Love Again. And today's episode is simply the audio of that webinar session. It's about an hour long, and the webinar was a lot longer, but we cut out the part where we were coaching the individuals who came on the call. So here is the webinar, How to Heal Your Old Relationship Patterns So You Can Fall in Love Again. Hey, everybody. Welcome. Welcome to the webinar. Right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Just a minute. Give me a second to just arrange my notes so that I can see what I'm sharing today. Happy Friday for those of you who were working this week. Hope you all had a great Thanksgiving last week. We are going to jump right in because as I prepared, I realized, oh my God, I have a lot of stuff to say. There's a lot in here. So we are going to be talking about healing old relationship patterns so that you can find love again. So this is like a huge topic. It always underlies everyone's journey to love after divorce. Like there really isn't anyone who goes through a difficult relationship or past relationship trauma or any kind of relationship difficulty that does not have to do some of this work. And of course, people do this work many different ways, but creating a new relationship that actually works does require some self-reflection, a lot of self-awareness, and a lot of change, because we don't want to repeat what we did before. We want to create change. So I think it's a huge topic. This is I do this work a lot in my coaching practice. This is huge, even though I'm a dating coach. Well, I'll do my introduction in a second, but this work of understanding your old relationship patterns is huge. Sometimes people don't want to do it because they're like, well, I don't want to dwell in the past and I don't want to look at the past and I don't want to think about the negative. But the idea is not to stay in it. The idea is to look at it in a way that is not shaming so that you can name it and you can change it. But you have to do it from a place of self-compassion and self-understanding and a really good self-concept. So I can understand, for some people, if you haven't done some basic healing, it can be hard to really see these things about yourself, but it's just super important. All right. I'm going to start by welcoming all of you. Welcome to the Healing Your Old Relationship Patterns After Divorce so that you can create a whole new loving relationship. I appreciate you spending your Friday evening with me. You are in the right webinar if you are a person who identifies as a woman, if you have been divorced, and if you are wanting to create a loving relationship after your divorce. Now, of course, these issues are they don't only apply to people who have been through divorce, but that is the focus of the examples that I will be using, is the focus of how I present my work, because I have been divorced and remarried, and that is the heart of the work that I do. So you're in the right place if you're divorced, typically late 30s, early 40s, 50s, 60s. A lot of my work will apply to you. If you are not in that range, of course, you're more than welcome here to take all of this away. But if you feel like some examples don't resonate, this is why. Our focus is really a lot of women who go through divorce are in midlife. This is usually where the issues come to a head. So I just focus my work on those people. So if you are a divorced woman who's looking for a new relationship, welcome. You are the heart of the work that I do. You all are the mission for everything that I do, whether it's my podcast or my coaching practice or my email list or my free course. Wherever you have found me and come here, welcome. I appreciate you being here. Today's agenda is really pretty straightforward. I'm going to dive right into teaching. I'm going to teach for about an hour. I'm going to get through as many relationship patterns as I can. And then I will talk a little bit about my coaching practice and invite you to book a consultation call with me so that we can talk about working together. This is the work that I do. I do this full time. I have a pretty robust practice of one-on-one clients. I also have a small group program. And this is the work I do in both is the same. It is really just helping divorced women heal, grow, change their old patterns, learn dating, because sometimes it's new to us. Learn what they need to do in dating, create a dating strategy that works so that you can meet a partner that is loving, trustworthy, nourishing, safe, and you can ride off into the sunset and get on with your life. Like, we do not want to be in this dating scene forever. We want to get in, get out, and move on with our life. So that's my goal. And that is what I will be talking about when I tell you about my coaching practice. So if you are new to my work, my name is Shade Curry. I am a certified life coach. I have been certified 3 times. I really just continue to delve into the expertise that helps my clients the most. So my first certification was in trauma recovery, which I went through the International Association of Trauma Recovery Coaches and got that certification specifically to apply it to the trauma of divorce, because a lot of trauma that people talk about, childhood trauma, a lot of things, it is only in recent times that it has, because I got divorced in 2015. So it's been 7 years now. And at that time, people weren't really talking about divorce trauma, right? So I went through trauma coaching myself, and I've taken that and then really taken it and I applied it to the divorce scenario, because there are just some unique situations that we go through. Like, even when you talk about narcissistic abuse in relationships, there is a unique way. If you were married to a narcissist and divorced to a narcissist, the way the system can be used to abuse a person during divorce, even in co-parenting, financial abuse, spiritual abuse. Like, there's just so much there that is unique to the divorce situation. And so I've taken that certification and really taken those concepts and applied it to the unique divorce situation. Then I went on to get certified as a general life coach, which is just goal setting, emotions, emotional processing, I already said goal setting, achieving goals, managing your emotions, managing your emotional state, just so many things, because general life coaching is like a person's whole life. So money, handling money, career coaching, business coaching, like all of those things came in my general life coaching certification. And I did that because I really wanted to help divorced women build their best life after divorce. So I got all of those skills and brought them in. And then I got certified this year as a feminist coach. And what that is, because I know feminism has so many different definitions and people think different things about it. But in this context, it was really the how to coach to help women with the limiting beliefs that are in the cultural narrative that apply mostly to women. So a lot of things around body image, like we have such a struggle with our body image because there is a cultural narrative that is always pointing fingers at the way a woman looks, a woman's weight, a woman's figure, all of those things. And it really affects women in so many ways at work. You'd be surprised at how so women who might be bigger actually get paid less at work. Yeah, I bet you didn't know that, right? So this is where feminist coaching comes in. It is really more about the thinking and the cultural narrative that harms women and how to coach women on that thinking. And that applies a lot in dating, because a lot of these thinking patterns that relationship patterns that we're going to talk about actually have a feminist, a misogynistic flavor to them, because you will find that men don't have these problems. Men aren't over-functioning in relationships. And it's not because they're better at relationships. It's just because they are not told a lot of the things that we are told when we were younger or just in general. So those are my 3 certifications, and I take those concepts and I really weave them together to apply to the dating process. I do have a specific dating process that I teach my clients, and that comes from my journey and everything I pull together in my journey. Like I said, I got divorced in 2015. And I met my now husband online. I dated on the apps. I dated both on the apps and off the apps. Successfully met a lot of great people, but I met my husband on Bumble. So I'm a fan of Bumble. And we met February of 2018 and we got married in June of 2019. So we were together about 18 months before getting married. We have now been married over 3 years. We're happily married, have a good time. Like all the normal things that would happen in a marriage are the things that we go through. We continue to do the work, but we truly, truly do enjoy each other. We enjoy our family. We enjoy our relationship. Right after this webinar, I'm going to try to send out the replay right after, and then we are going skating, roller skating together for our date night. So it's just the beauty of that is just having a normal relationship with a normal human being without all the craziness and like ups and downs and the emotional roller coaster and toxicity and drama that can exist in other relationships. So my heart really is to educate women on how to create a similar relationship for themselves. I do that through my podcast. I do that through webinars such as this one, through my email list. And then for the women who want to dig deeper and accept my mentorship and support in their journey, I have my coaching practice, which I became a life coach. I started my life coaching journey in 2017. So I've now been a life coach for a little over 5 years. And I guess that's me. So I'm remarried. Between us, we have 6 children. My son by my marriage, my 2 biological children, and my 3 children adopted out of the foster care system. So that constitutes our family. If you have other questions about me, actually feel free to just put them in the chat, because sometimes I don't even know, what do people want to know, right? So if you look at the bottom, if you are on Zoom and you look at the bottom of your screen, you will see a Q&A box where you can ask questions. If you put it in the Q&A box, it comes directly to me. No one else will see your question, so you can have some privacy that way. There is also, I believe, a chat box. And in the chat box, you can send a message. If you want to just have everyone see your message, you can tag everyone, or you can just send it to hosts and panelists, and I will be the only one that will see that. So if you have questions about me that I did not address in my introduction, please feel free to ask, and I will be happy to answer. So again, welcome everyone. I see all of you in the attendee list. Welcome. It's a pleasure to have you here. If you would love to introduce yourself, just tell me your name. I see your names, but tell me where you're from, how long you've been divorced, just something about yourself. Put that in the chat box so that just kind of like we kind of have a little party together. All right. We're going to go ahead and get started. That is our agenda for today. That is my intro. So Jenny asks, does your husband have any kids, and is your ex-husband in the picture at all? Yes. So my current husband, so our first is my son by marriage. So we have 6 between us. The first is his son, my stepson. He is in his 20s. He is recently married. He got married a year ago. And so I now have a bonus daughter who is my daughter-in-law. So yes, our family is we're like expanding so quickly. It's like, wow, we had an amazing Thanksgiving this year because so our son and his wife moved back to the St. Louis area. So now they're local again. And then they invited her 2 sisters, their husbands, and their children to come for Thanksgiving, and we hosted. So we had about 20 people in our home for Thanksgiving. It was beautiful. It was just really nice. And like when you say like, it felt like a restoration of just everything we both always wanted, which is that our children would be here and together, and we would spend holidays together, and people wouldn't be fighting the whole time. So my ex just always ruined the holidays. So anyway. And then your other question is my ex-husband in the picture at all? So mostly not in the picture. He and I are not in contact. I really just have established no contact because of his behavior. However, we did have to be in contact this year because to modify the divorce, because the younger boys came to live with me. So we had to go to court to modify the divorce. Of course, and then navigating that interim period with visits and things like that. That was always a little bit rough when that happens. But, one of the beauties of coaching is that I just handling it this year has been so different from how I handled it before, because I remember during the initial divorce, like, oh my God, my emotions was all over the place. I was triggered all the time, so anxious, so like just in a state. And I'm just comparing like 7 years later, just how much easier, how much calmer, how much more peaceful. Of course, it helps that I have the support of my husband. Like he goes with me to court every single time, and it's amazing. But just even internally, I just have so much peace and so much calm because of my ability to see my own thoughts that create or attach me to the drama. So it's not that I create the drama, but when drama comes up, like from my ex, like in the past, I would attach to it and like get all worked up about it. And that was just not the case this year. So it's awesome. So yes, you could, for the most part, my ex-husband is not in the picture at all. I generally see him in court, but we don't talk at all. And he is not in contact with the children because, that's just who he is. That's all I can say. So, all right. Okay, I'm going to go ahead. I don't see any other questions, so I'm going to jump right in. Thank you, Jenny, for that question. All right, we're talking about changing unhealthy patterns. Now, there are as many unhealthy patterns as there are combinations of human beings. So, of course, we're not going to be able to delve into all of them today, but I want to try to get through as many as I can, and you'll start to see sort of like, oh, this is what it looks like when something is an unhealthy pattern, and you can pick out some of your own. But if you already know some of your unhealthy patterns, please put those in the chat. I would love to hear from you about what patterns have you already worked on, since your divorce. What patterns have you already identified as, oh, yeah, this needed to change after my divorce, and I worked on that. Or these are the patterns that I recognize about myself currently that I want to change. Or I'm not sure, is this an unhealthy pattern? So you can ask that as well. We can just kind of have that conversation. So there are a lot of unhealthy patterns. This list today will not be exhaustive, but it will give you an idea of how to identify them. Now, every pattern, whether it's healthy or unhealthy, every pattern of behavior that creates results in our lives will consist of you'll have certain characteristics that will always show up. One will be usually a trigger. Now, the trigger is not always something big that happens. A trigger is just what is the thing that causes you to start the thinking pattern, right? So I'll give an example. I'll give an example that's not a relationship pattern. Starbucks. Whenever I so I was a Starbucks addict for probably a good 15 to 17 years. I could not pass a Starbucks without stopping to buy coffee, or at least wanting to buy coffee, right? And that was a pattern, and I was okay with it. I spent a lot of money on Starbucks in the day. It was all good. I do not drink coffee anymore for the most part. Just middle age has set in, and I just can't handle the caffeine. But the trigger, you could say, in that situation would be seeing a Starbucks. So every time I saw a Starbucks, I was like, oh my God, I would get a white chocolate mocha with whipped cream and coconut milk. Oh my God. So that would be the trigger. So the trigger could be a scenario. It could be a place. It could be a person. It could be a thing. It could be, it could even be a memory that comes up. So you will always have a trigger or a situation that starts the pattern going. Always good to know that, because then you can help heal your pattern or change your pattern by knowing when it starts. So that's the first thing. Then you will always have a thought that is attached to the pattern, a thought that keeps the pattern going, a thought that hooks you into the pattern. It's a way of thinking. You might have started thinking this way when you were a kid. It might be a belief that you've adopted over time. It might be something that people have said to you. So the thinking pattern will always be a characteristic of an unhealthy pattern. Then there's always emotions attached. Emotions are the fuel. Emotions are the thing that keep you from, that make you go forward in the pattern and prevent you from stopping yourself, right? The emotion is the thing that fuels it. It's the thing that like starts to move in your body. The discomfort in your body comes from the emotion, and that propels you to do something that maybe you wouldn't want to do. So if you think of an addict who wants their next fix, it's because in their body, they are missing the feeling that the fix gave them. And so now they have these other feelings and they don't want these feelings. So they want the substance again in order to feel better. There will always be emotions. Sometimes the emotion is the trigger. So sometimes that happens, especially if you've had trauma. Sometimes an emotion comes in without you even having a thought. But those are all the nuances. Then there's actions. There's something that you do. There's something that you do or something you don't do that creates the outcome. So there's always the trigger, the thoughts, the emotions, the actions you take, and then the result of those actions. And those all constitute the pattern. And you will see the pattern going over. It just repeats. Every time the situation happens, you will notice that when you are in an unhealthy pattern, it just repeats over and over and over again. When it comes to abuse in relationships, they describe it as a cycle, right? There's that happy honeymoon period, and then there's the tension that starts, then the abuse happens, then everything gets calm and happy again, and it just goes over and over and over again. So let's talk about some common patterns. All right. So Jenny introduced herself, divorced 2018, after 20 years together, 2 relationships. I definitely identify with that. I was together with my ex 17 years. And due to dishonesty, totally get that. Narcissistic tendencies, yes, totally get that. All right, so one of your patterns that you say is ignoring red flags, and you need to be selective and know what to ask and address early, right? So you can see that you've started to notice that, like with the pattern, ignoring red flags, that's the action that you take, right? And to get a handle on that pattern, you want to identify why do I ignore the red flags? What am I thinking when the red flag shows up that causes me to ignore it? What is the feeling that comes up, right? And then what keeps me from asking these questions? What keeps me from addressing it early? And then boundaries as well. Yes. So those 2 patterns that you mentioned are on my list. So we're definitely going to address those today. So some common patterns that come up in relationships. One is overfunctioning. So I'm just going to jump in. They're not in any particular order. One is overfunctioning. I see this a lot with women. So when a woman overfunctions in relationships, typically it looks like doing everything for the guy. A relationship, you set up all the dates, you move the relationship forward, you have all the conversations, you text him you give him money. He's always needing something and you're always there to give it to him. Oh, he's going through a lot right now. The woman is over functioning, basically doing the most, enabling the man to be in a relationship without having to actually do the work of investing in a relationship. And this happens at all levels of relationships, dating, and marriage, all the way to long-term relationships. The trigger for this pattern is when something is not working in the situation, right? When like something goes wrong, something is going wrong, whether it's something going wrong with the man, something's going wrong with the relationship, something's going wrong in the finances, something's going wrong in the home. And the women who tend to have this overfunction typically grew up in families or have developed somehow a high tolerance for being neglected. This particular pattern is the one that gets, when you see strong, intelligent, successful, fabulous women in toxic relationships, this is it. Literally, their ability to be strong and to take care of stuff is misapplied in the relationship because it makes them feel like, oh, I can handle it. Whatever the guy is doing, I can handle it. I can handle it. It's okay. I got this. I can do it. I got this. And so they do too much. And it comes from thinking that I have to make sure everything's okay. Women that I see who have this tend to have had mothers who overfunctioned, mothers with whom everything had to be in place. Everything had to be okay, right? They had mothers who had anxiety. And because they had anxiety, things could not be okay unless everything was okay. And because of that, they sort of pass that anxiety on to their daughters. Now, of course, that's typically where I see it, but I've seen it in other situations too. The thinking pattern is that I have to make sure everything is okay or I won't be loved. I have to make sure everything is okay or I can't feel like I'm good enough. And the emotion is anxiety. So if you see something in your environment or see something in your relationship that is going wrong, can you sit with it and just be like, oh, well, this is going wrong, but without feeling that immediate impulse to jump in and fix it, right? Oh, so Jenny says, that's you and your mom. Listen, I have seen this a lot. It wasn't me and my and my mom per se, but I noticed that definitely I was that mom in some ways. Like my daughter and I have talked through a lot of this stuff. Like I was that mom in some ways because my ex was narcissistic. And in order to keep the peace, I would always jump in to fix everything. I made everything happen. Like I literally, like I kept our household running so that nothing would go wrong. So he wouldn't get angry, so he wouldn't rage, all of those things. So yes, definitely common pattern. That's why I'm starting with this one. Where, yeah, I hear you, we're fixers. Yes. And then we become resentful. That's in the result line. So let me finish the pattern. So you have the anxiety, the action, you jump in, you take on all the responsibility, you fix, you do all the things, you make sure the family looks good on the outside, you keep all the relationships going, you make sure nobody sees that your husband or your partner or your boyfriend isn't great, you make sure nobody can see that. And the result is you tolerate passive and neglectful partners, stay in relationships that are going nowhere, create resentment, both in yourself for having to do all of it, but you also create resentment in your partner. Anytime you try to change or ask him to do anything, he's like, why are you asking me to do anything? You've been doing it all. Like, what's the problem? You've always done it. Why do you want to change that now? And so it just creates this toxic brew in the relationship. And over-functioning is one of the things that I really help my clients not do at the early dating stages, because if you over-function early, it's really hard to see if a man will step up, right? This is different from being passive or not wanting to pursue. People get those two confused. Or they're like, well, I don't want to ask him for a date because I don't want to overfunction. No, you can ask him for a date, but you don't want to ask him for 10 dates. Like if you ask him for the first date or even the second date, he should start stepping up. If he's not stepping up on the third, fourth, fifth date, you don't fill the gap. You sit back and wait to see if he's going to do something. So overfunctioning is a huge pattern. A lot of women have this. We'll talk a little bit when I run through the patterns about what we can do to start to change these patterns. All right, the next one, pretty common. You probably recognize this either in yourself or your girlfriends. We're either this girlfriend or we have a girlfriend who has this. Insecurity and neediness in relationships. This comes from abandonment, having experienced abandonment either in a past relationship or in childhood. So that is kind of the source of this. And the trigger is something that your partner does. Either something that your partner does, whether it's pulling back or having a response or saying something, or your relationship status. And if you feel insecure and needy, it's because you're like, I'm not lovable. The underlying thought of that is I'm not lovable, or I need a relationship to prove that I'm lovable, or I need my relationship to work in order to prove that I'm lovable. The person who has this pattern doesn't feel good in themselves. They don't feel worthy. They don't feel secure just in themselves. They look to their partners or they look to their relationships to make them feel good because maybe they lost a significant relationship when they were young. I've worked with clients who lost a dad. So it's not always abuse. I worked with a client who lost her dad when she was 2. He was killed in an accident, and that triggered abandonment for her. And of course, then her mother had certain patterns and that made it worse. And she kind of cycled through that as an adult. Happy ending for her. She's currently been in a happy, committed relationship for a year, and they are probably going to be tying the knot sometime next year. So happy ending for that client. The emotion that the person feels is unworthiness. The emotion in this pattern is unworthiness or insecurity. You just don't feel like you're okay. You just don't feel like you're okay based on whatever is happening. And then the actions, there's so many actions that happen here, but often they will hold on to poor relationships. They will hold on to a relationship because being single just feels so bad. Being single is to them a signal that there's something wrong with them. So they'll hold on to poor relationships. They will abandon themselves. They will stay with abusive partners. A whole lot of things that can happen if you don't feel like, I'm okay. I want a relationship, but I'm okay without one. A relationship doesn't define me. Another pattern that I see this a lot in dating is, I call it the wanting to be chased syndrome. And the source of this is the person doesn't feel lovable. It's similar to the insecurity, but it shows up a different way. Usually the trigger is when the person is dating, when the person meets a potential partner or is on the apps, And the thought behind it is usually, I need them to prove that they love me. I need whoever I'm with to prove that they love me. And this is different from wanting your partner to step up. This is more, I don't feel lovable, so I need to put like 20,000 challenges in front of a potential partner so that they prove that they love me. And really what that person is looking for is the proof that they are lovable. And it ends up coming off as cold and hostile. If you hear women who are always like venting about men, or who are always like kind of angry at men, or who treat their partners poorly, but want the partner, but treat them poorly, it's because they don't truly believe that they are lovable. They don't truly believe that that person loves them, and they get kind of hostile, insecure, cold. They play hard to get. They have unrealistic expectations of their partner. They make unrealistic demands of their partner. And the result here is usually they are still single, right? They push away their potential partners and they remain single. So that's the wanting to be chasing. It also just comes from not feeling lovable, not feeling worthy. You see this, so that was your ex, Jenny, but so you probably noticed some avoidant behaviors with your ex. It shows up with women as avoidance also, but we typically don't think of women as avoidant. But we have our flavor of avoidance also, where when you have difficulty receiving love, it can show up in one of these ways. All right. He was loving, and then he would mean for you to chase him. Yeah, totally see that. All right. Now, another pattern is the fairy tale thinking pattern. These are women who have, and you always see it on the surface. It can be kind of tricky, but it shows up with women who have had like past chaotic relationships. And especially some of us who've been divorced have this too, especially if we're married young and married for a long time. It's sort of this teenage way of looking at relationships. So we come out into the dating world and we're like looking for Prince Charming, right? It's like, oh my God, I'm excited for my fairy tale. Now, of course, we all want a fairy tale, but real fairy tales are unrealistic, right? The true fairy tale is unrealistic. The true thing you see on TV is unrealistic. And women who have this tend to have some abandonment, but literally they want their story to unfold perfectly. They want to go on the first date and feel this intense chemistry. They want to feel this intense spark. They want the man to be tall, dark, and handsome. They want him to be rich. They want him to sweep them off their feet. They want him to like all of the things. They want like nothing to go wrong. He doesn't have any flaws. He can read their minds. And usually what happens in this situation is they end up with a narcissist, because like only narcissists can really show up at a fairy tale level. They go by chemistry, like that, you have that intense infatuation. And so they're sort of addicted to that high in their relationship. So the trigger, you would say, could be relationships, dating. The thinking pattern is love looks like a fairy tale. It doesn't always come up in that way. Sometimes you hear women who say, well, I didn't feel any chemistry. I've heard it when I'm working with clients and we're working through profiles and they're like, I'm looking at his profile and I don't feel any chemistry. And I'm like, like this is like a profile, right? Like this is like a one-dimensional view of this man. It's like a resume. You're not meant to feel sparks by looking at a photograph. That's not real. That's not realistic. And typically, if you think like that, you will go through the apps looking for the perfect profile, because that perfect profile looks like a movie. Those profiles are typically scammers or narcissists or people who, like those people are not real in that way. Most men are just normal humans like you, and they're not going to look like a movie. So the desire for that fairy tale relationship causes patterns over and over. And the result you see is you'll see the woman in relationships that flame out very quickly. They'll meet someone online and it's like, oh my God, and they just fall headlong. And within 2 weeks, the whole relationship is over. Or they go into the relationship and it turns into this narcissistic, abusive relationship because it was all based on this chemistry, this addiction. You see it in the love addiction dynamic with the anxious attachment, avoidant attachment. We all have attachment styles. I'm always a little hesitant to label people with attachment styles because a lot of what goes into those attachment styles is unhealthy. So I really don't like for my clients to be like, well, I'm an anxiously attached, which means I cannot help but to have these unhealthy patterns. So it's a good model for identifying some of your patterns, but you don't have to stick with those patterns. Just because you're an anxious avoidant doesn't mean you have to be that forever. You can develop becoming a secure attached style by changing your relationship patterns. All right, another pattern. This is for my good girls. This is for my Christian ladies. This is for my nice girls. Being overly conscientious. This is a tough one because there are some people who have personalities that you're just very conscientious as a personality type. So it comes from a personality type. And then if that personality type is reinforced through either religion or people pleasing or being taught by your parents that you're supposed to be nice and you're supposed to be compliant, you will create this black and white thinking in your relationships and in your dating where you never want the other person to feel anything bad. You're always trying to make sure you never do anything wrong. You never say anything mean, never say anything bad, never say anything that would hurt someone. And that gets you into 100% compliance with what other people want in their relationships, in the dating relationship. So you go on a date, the guy is not really for you. Maybe he doesn't have the same values that you have or whatever. And he asks you on the spot for a second date. You don't want to make him feel bad. So you say yes. Now you want to cancel the date, but now it's well, I told him I would go on a second date and I don't want to be a flake. So you go on the second date, even though you don't want to. And on and on and on. Or, someone's messaging you and you go on a date and you drag on the relationship over and over again because you don't want to hurt their feelings. It is being overly conscientious. Being conscientious is a good thing, right? But when it is an unhealthy pattern applied in dating, it can get you into a marriage that you don't want to be in because you go on that first date, you go on that second date, you go on that third date, you still don't say no, you keep going. What happens is your brain actually starts to become familiar with that person. Your brain starts to say, well, he's not so bad, it's okay. And that pattern can take you all the way to the altar with someone who is not right for you. So being overly conscientious is a pattern. It's usually triggered by a request from another person. It's triggered by being in an interaction with the other person where one person wants something. And the thinking pattern is, I don't want to make them feel bad. I don't want them to feel bad. I don't want them to be disappointed. I don't want them to be hurt. The emotion is guilt. You feel guilty at even wanting something different from what the other person wants. And actions, you comply. You don't say no. You don't assert yourself. You don't say what you want. And the result is being in a relationship that is not right for you, doing things that are not right for you, doing things that are not safe for you. I've seen this where women will, the man says, oh, I'm going to come pick you up. And you're like, well, I don't know him. I don't want him to come to my house. But you feel bad. I don't want it to seem like I'm saying he's a serial killer. So you say yes. You give him your address. That is unsafe. So it really causes women to put themselves in situations that are unsafe for them because they don't want to hurt someone else. So because they don't want to hurt someone else, they create opportunities for them to be hurt. That is a really hard one. I just worked with a client this week who does have this conscientious nature. If you go to my Facebook, you'll see where I posted her words, but she said it was so hard to cancel the date. It took me an hour, but she did. And I'm so proud of her because I was so brave of her. It was an unhealthy pattern that she's always had. And it took her a minute to really lean into the courage and lean into the, I guess you could say, the discomfort of doing something that broke a pattern that she's had for a long time. All right, the next pattern I want to talk about is, and this one is related to overfunctioning, so I won't spend a lot of time on it. It's having a high tolerance for neglect. If you grew up in a family where you were taught to be very self-reliant at a young age, you had to get your own stuff done, you had to you weren't allowed to be a kid. You weren't allowed to relax. You weren't supported and held and even spoiled a little bit. You may have a high tolerance for neglect, just overall, where you feel like you don't deserve good things, where you feel guilty if you do something for yourself. Everything you do is for other people. Again, back to overfunctioning. In what happens in a relationship is you won't notice when you are not being cared for. You won't notice when your partner is not reciprocating, like that mutual reciprocity is not there. You won't notice, and you will tolerate a whole lot of neglect. And just running through that pattern real quick, you will attract and tolerate relationships where you are not being cared for, where you're not being loved, where your views are not being respected, where the other person doesn't mind doing things that are harmful to you or that make you feel pain. Again, that just really goes back to overfunctioning. All right, the next pattern I want to delve into is hiding. Hiding, fear, and a fear of failure. I see this a lot with my ladies who hesitate to get started dating. One second, I'm going to take a drink of water. The hiding, the fear of failure, often the source of this is shame. Having anxiety around feeling shame. Typically what happens is when we go for something, especially something that's kind of like public, like our relationships are somewhat public because our family members are always asking about it. Have you met someone? Are you married? When are you going to get married? When are you going to have kids? When you are dating, typically your boyfriend will meet people in your life. And then if it doesn't work out, there's this perception of shame, perception that there's something wrong with you if a relationship doesn't work out, if you got a divorce, or if you pick someone and then you have to break up with that person. And so that fear of failure that comes from the fear of the shame that you think it will come later can cause you to hide from relationships. I see this with people who will be shadowing the apps. They'll be on the apps, but they will never, I know women who they never set up their profile. They're just on the apps, watching, just watching all the men go by, right? So technically they're dating, but they haven't seen anyone, but they've just set things up so that they don't meet anyone because of the fear of failure. Sometimes it comes with not wanting to go out, not wanting to even go to places where you could meet someone or you could interact with other people, because just the fear of failing in such a public way is really, really hard. So the trigger can be dating, social interactions, interacting with men. Sometimes it shows up as maybe a man asks you out and you go on the date, but then you fade away and you don't text him anymore, not because you don't like him, but because you're afraid of what it could mean to move forward with that person or to go on a second date or to have those interactions. The thinking pattern, like I said, comes from shame, and it comes from there's something wrong with me, or I will be exposed as having something wrong with me if I fail. So it's just that the shame creates this fear. Shame is a very toxic emotion, and it causes us to want to hide away from people. It causes us to not want to ask for help, to not want to do anything that might cause people to point fingers at us, which for sure we live in a society, most societies, not just in the United States where I live. For sure, my country of origin, Nigeria, is very shame-based also. So I think it's just a human thing. We've built a lot of cultures that shame for, all kinds of things. And so it really is up to the individual to build up your own new pattern around dating that is not shame-based. So you have to see where shame is creating patterns for you. And even if the society continues to be shaming, to create your own pattern with a whole new set of triggers, a whole new set of thinking patterns, emotions, and actions that create a different set of results for you. So for someone who has a huge fear of failure, of being shamed around their relationship, a way that I would work with them is to say, listen, it might be possible that you don't meet someone. What if we could take the shame out of the possibility that you are single forever? Right? Not that you would be single forever, especially if you work with me. If you work with me, you're not going to be single forever. But it's the thinking that I'm working with in that moment. I'm like, listen, what if we reframe what it means to be single forever? What if we reframe it to not be shameful? What if it's not shameful to be single forever? And so one of the ways I did that work for myself was I literally had two life plans. I knew I always wanted to be married again. I love being with my husband. I love just having a companion. It was just, I always wanted it. But I also knew, like, well, what if I don't find someone? I was like, if I don't find someone, no problem. I was like, I'm going to move in. At that time, my older sister was single. I'm like, okay, me and my older sister, we're going to get a place together. And then after the kids move out, of course, I'm going to get a place together. And then I'm going to invite two of my friends. And then the four of us are going to be golden girls, and we're going to travel the world, and we're going to hang out and have parties at our house, like, which to me felt good. So that was my way of saying, taking the shame out of the possibility of being single forever after my divorce. I literally created like a whole new plan that I loved, that felt good to me. And so I was like, okay, now that I've taken the shame out of this scenario, I can go out and date and have fun and meet someone, or not meet someone if it doesn't happen. But of course, once you remove this pattern that keeps you hiding, it exponentially increases your odds of success. Because when you have the shame, you hide, which makes it more likely that you will remain single. Okay, I hope that kind of makes sense. If you have questions with how I'm explaining these, please pop the questions in the chat. I will be happy to like clarify anything that I'm saying. All right, the next pattern is the fear of confrontation. And the fear of confrontation really comes from the fear of negative emotion. So if you were married to someone who was abusive or narcissistic, you probably experienced this, where that person having a negative emotion, getting angry, was just a huge, huge, huge trigger. And the way that shows up in dating is you will never want to do something that you think will upset a potential partner. Not because you don't want to do the thing or because you think anything's going to happen, but just the trigger itself just plays out. So you won't want to say what's really on your mind. You won't want to say no to things that you're like, I don't really want to do that, or that's not for me. You won't want to express your own boundaries. Like if you're like, hey, I'm really here for a real relationship. I want to get married. I'm hoping to get married within 2 years. That's kind of my timeline. And I want to let you know that. So if that's not your timeline, we can go our separate ways. You won't want to say things like that. Or if you say something, and then someone criticizes you, you say you're at a date and you tell the guy, well, I'm actually looking for marriage. And he's like, wow, that sounds kind of desperate. You will feel bad. You will back all the way up because he's confronted something that you said. And the fear of confrontation makes you backpedal. So I've seen women who, they're like, hey, are we exclusive? Are we boyfriend and girlfriend? And the guy's like, well, I just want to see how it goes. We don't need to label it. And they will backpedal from asserting what they want in the relationship because of the fear of the other person's negative emotions. Some of it stems from not wanting to lose the relationship. Some of it stems from, which is around scarcity. Some of it also stems from just not wanting to be in the presence of someone who is upset with them. Like that desire for approval from anybody is so strong that like they will do anything. And so the thinking pattern there is, I don't want them to be angry. I don't want him to be angry with me. And you can see how like that doesn't make sense in the context of dating because you don't even know this person. If he becomes angry, that is the red flag. But if you show up in a way that keeps him from getting angry, you're not even getting to know the person. You're not even seeing the real him. You don't even know if he has a temper because you're already walking on eggshells and making sure that he never gets angry. The last one I will talk about, okay, there are two, I have a couple more. Okay, I'll see if I can just do two more because I really want to get to what you need to do to start to address these patterns. The next one is being in denial. And Jenny, I believe you talked about that in the chat. Being in denial, and that also comes from, so denial has like lots of different reasons, and it shows up in many different ways. But you had talked about not seeing red flags, right? Sometimes denial shows up in not seeing the red flags. Sometimes it shows up in seeing the red flags, but then explaining them away, right? Denial also shows up in being easily impressed by other people, always feeling like the other person is good. excuse me, and if you think anything bad about them, you're wrong. You're being judgy. You're not being nice. You're being mean. You're being overly critical, right? Sometimes my clients will say, oh yeah, he has a good job. I was like, how do you know he has a good job? Well, he said he made, I don't know, 6 figures. I'll be like, okay, well, he said so. Doesn't mean it's so. So we still got to go through this process of evaluating this guy. Believing that people are all good and everything they say is true. A lot of this comes, and this is one of the things that has come through, like in my feminist training, is that in the past, like you're talking 100 years, 150 years, women were considered just one step up from children. So a woman would be spanked by her husband for not doing what he wanted, couldn't make decisions. She was just basically in the house to have children and take care of the children. And he treated her like a child. And that thinking is still in our cultural narrative, that women are, not smart, aren't logical, we're just like children, like we don't make good decisions. And so if you have imbibed this narrative, you will show up naively and in denial about what a man is doing, because your brain may have been programmed to always believe that the man is right. Like he's always right, and I'm usually wrong. I see this a lot with women. They second guess themselves in relationship. They have a hard time making decisions. They have a hard time making decisions that go against what the man says. Like it is just a whole stew with the denial showing up in a naive way. If a man says something, oh, he must be fine, I don't want to make him feel bad. Like all of that just comes up in this one. We talked a little bit about desire for approval. That's similar. Indecision and second guessing. That has a little bit of a thread to this pattern. It's sort of like an emotional dependence and an intellectual dependence on others. And so it ties back to, as women, we get told that our thinking isn't right, and some interpretation. I mean, like I come from a Christian tradition, and there are verses in the Bible that imply that women are like, basically make bad decisions, right? Like it implies that. Now, of course, that is some people's interpretation of what's been said there, but that's been taken and then applied like, yeah, women are, they're emotional and they don't make good decisions. And that can create a pattern where you rely on others intellectually, where you never feel like you make good decisions, where you don't trust your own decisions. You always second guess your own decisions. You second guess your intuition. When your intuition is telling you something is going wrong here, you second guess it over and over and over again. Or you will rely on what your family members say about your relationship instead of relying on what you know about your relationship. Recently, I was working with a client, and we had run through this person, and both she and I had come to the conclusion that he was not for her. And she sort of like released him to date other people. She was like, oh yeah, if you want to ask this person out, that's fine. But her whole family was like, why would you tell your man to go date someone else? That's why you're single. But he wasn't right for her. And she felt very upset because it caused her to start second guessing whether she should have encouraged him to date someone else. And I had to like walk her back from the ledge and be like, okay, so remember when you all went to dinner as a group and he got mad because he had to pay $5 for something? Remember when he was being abusive to the cat and you noticed that? Like, I had to remind her of all the red flags that had come up, which is why the decision where she had said, I'm not interested. But you can see how the emotional and intellectual dependence on others can really create being in a wrong relationship. A lot of my clients were in their first relationship because they second guessed their decision to break up with their ex, or a family member pressured them to marry their ex, things like that. That is an unhealthy pattern that shows up a lot in dating and relationships. Sorry, apologize for rushing through these because we just, so many. That also relates to needing permission from others to make decisions in your relationship, feeling unable to say no in the face of guilt, shaming, or emotional blackmail, which I think, Jenny, that applies to your comment where your ex said was shamed you for getting back on a dating app 6 weeks after a breakup and said you were low, which has held you back since you were the good girl, and now makes you feel like you should have waited longer and showed him that kid. Yeah, that's manipulation. Yeah, the manipulation works because you are not trusting your own thinking. You believe that other people know better. So when you believe that other people know better, and your thinking is not to be trusted, you'll be easily manipulated. It's so easy to manipulate because all the person has to do is question you and challenge you, and you go into a spiral of like indecision or walking back your decision. So that is a pattern that you have to break. And that pattern will start with, for you, someone criticizing you. That is your trigger. Someone saying something that is a different opinion from what you said or what you believe or what you want to do. So if you go down the model that I've given you, start to identify those triggers. What triggers me into being manipulated? Someone disagrees with me. That is the first step. Then when someone disagrees with you, what is the thought that comes up for you? What is the thinking pattern that starts to come up? So in this case, the thinking pattern that you had was probably maybe he's right, because he said you were low, right? Which made you feel like you were out of integrity. And you believe that you started to think, maybe he's right. Maybe I am low. And then the emotion that came up, it would be interesting. It sounds like the emotion was shame for you. It might be a different emotion. Just, let me know if it's a different emotion there. The emotion there was shame. You felt shame because someone had a different opinion than you did. And you thought, oh, they must be right. You felt shame. And then all of those actions came up, right? Has held you back from dating. You started second guessing yourself. You started thinking about going back to the old relationship, all of those things. You allowed yourself to be manipulated. And the result is you didn't move on quickly to the relationship that was right for you. You probably burned a whole lot of energy with all of that overthinking, with all of that stressing, with all of that, worrying and criticizing yourself. You removed, you reduced your own enjoyment of yourself. You reduced your own self-esteem and self-concept. Like all of that is the result that you created from thinking, maybe they're right. Maybe they know better than I do. And that is the thought that like you have to start shifting and changing. All right, let's talk about shifting and changing some of these. There are 5 stages of shifting and changing these thoughts, right? And you have to like kind of practice them. This is a lot of the work that I do with my clients. I teach them how to do this. We do the work together, and then I help them stay in it, because it's so easy to get started. And then it's like, oh, it's been 6 weeks and you haven't even thought about the pattern you were changing, right? And so working with me really helps my clients move forward a lot faster in the journey of changing these patterns. The other advantage, or the other thing that I usually have them do, I don't usually recommend that my clients like not date, because I like for them to sort of like they're dating in this controlled environment where, as their coach, I'm there to support them. Even if they have old patterns, you can keep dating, because we're going to be working through these patterns as you date, and you can actually see the result. You can see the patterns changing because you're out there every day on the apps. So when the trigger comes up, you can either work with me, you can change it on the spot, like all of that, I think just makes it so much faster to change the patterns and to find success in the love that you're looking for. All right. So the first step is awareness of the old pattern and the source, which we went into a lot of that today. You want to identify the trigger, the situation. You want to identify the thoughts that you're thinking when the situation comes up, the feeling that comes up. So Jenny, in your case, the feeling that comes up for you is shame. And you can start to identify, when I feel shame, what do I do? Or what do I not do? Right? And that tells you all the actions that fuel the pattern. Now, getting an awareness around the patterns that you are repeating in relationships is very hard to see when you are not in relationships, which is why I recommend date, right? And if you want to do it in a way that you like, I want to do it, but I want to be safe, then you can work with me to be safe so that you have that accountability and you have that support. The patterns are just hard to see if you are not in the situation that triggers them. So you don't want to run away from the situation. Another thing that can really hamper awareness is if you deny that the pattern is harming you. Like you feel like, oh, it's not a big deal. I'm an anxious attached person. I don't know how they say it. I have anxious attachment. It's just what I do. And you don't allow yourself to see how being anxiously attached is harming you, is creating the result of always being in relationships that are not healthy for you, or not finding the relationship that is healthy for you. And so if you deny that the results are harming you, it's going to be hard for you to like really stay in that awareness. And then another thing to watch out for in the awareness is that some of these unhealthy patterns are culturally normal, right? So when you're watching movies and watching TV, reading magazines, when you're listening to other people talk about their dating journeys, they might take some of these unhealthy patterns and present them as though they were normal, right? And so you have to watch for that. It makes it hard to identify if you are going by cultural societal narratives. All right, so number one, gain an awareness of the old pattern and the source. Number two is identify the new pattern you want to create. So because you know the situation, you have to create the new thing you want to do in that situation. The next time the ex sends me a text criticizing me, right? What do I want to think? Instead of thinking maybe he's right, what do you want to think? You want to think, well, he's not a good source of information, probably, or whatever. Like I work with my clients when we do models to design the new pattern for themselves. We call them intentional models. And then, so you identify the situation. What is the healthy response? What is the new healthy response that you want to create? And sometimes you might not know. You might be like, I don't know how to do anything different, right? What do healthy people do in this situation? You might actually have to do some relearning and gain some educating about the options that you may not even have known existed. If you've never seen someone respond in a healthy way in that situation, you may not know what that looks like. Like if your family, if you've done it in your first marriage and your family did it, and that unhealthy pattern has been passed down, you may not know what that looks like. Some of these patterns, like even in marriage, it's like how we fight, right? We fight the way we saw our parents fight, and we just don't know how to fight differently, right? And so this is why books are great. Coaching is great because your coach will give you new patterns that you can be like, okay, here's a pattern that might work for you. And then you massage it to fit you. And so the third thing you want to do, so once you have the awareness, you identify the pattern you want to create, you identify all the situation, the thoughts, the feelings, the actions, the results you want to create. And then you create a plan to change the pattern from the old one to the new one. This is where the practice comes in. You create a whole new model that you want to adopt, and then you create the steps and practices that you will take to achieve that change. Okay, so when my ex sends me this is what I would rather do. And here's the model that I'm going to go through, and here are the steps I'm going to take. Maybe I will go no contact. Maybe I will not respond to him, all of those things. Now, that's just the plan. Steps 1 through 3 are just the plan. Step 4 is you have to execute the change. You have to practice the change. So you got to put yourself in situations where there are opportunities to follow the plan, right? And when you do that, you will experience resistance. You will experience not wanting to do it. And a lot of coaching is helping you embrace the discomfort and the messiness of that middle state where the old pattern is still there and you're just starting to introduce the new pattern and they're overlapping. Sometimes you succeed, sometimes you fail. But overall, if you stay with it, if you practice, if you evaluate, like, okay, I didn't do the right thing yesterday. What didn't work there? What made me do the wrong thing again? What made me go back to that pattern? Or what's making me want to? Maybe you don't even quite do it, but you feel like the compulsion to just text that guy, and just like, he hasn't texted you in 3 days and you just want to text him because, you want to ask him out, or you want to text your ex because you're bored. All of those things, like, maybe you don't do it, but you can evaluate, or what made me want to do it? What was the safety thing, the safety part of my plan, or the alternative thing in my plan that I didn't do? So you look at what works, what didn't work, what you would do differently, you tweak your plan, and you stay with it. You stay with the practice. And over time, what will happen is you'll see the new pattern take over. Right. And I love it when I see when my clients start to tell me, hey, Sade, your voice was in my head. This happened, but your voice was in my head. I know that it's not really my voice that's in their head. It is really that they are remembering the pattern, and it just comes in the form of them remembering what I said. So, sometimes I put things in like funny ways or like really sassy ways, and they just remember it. It creates an anchor for them. And it's starting to take hold because they're remembering what I would say if I was standing there. And so over time, then they adopt the practice, and then we're able to just celebrate the wins. So when you practice and you evaluate, you will have some successes, you'll have some failures, but celebrate all of your wins. It's like, like a little kid who does something good. You want to catch yourself doing something good. You want to catch yourself showing up in a healthier way. You want to catch yourself, okay, I didn't go all the way. I didn't do all the steps, but at least I didn't say anything. I didn't say, normally maybe I would have yelled at that person, but I didn't yell at him. I was still mad, but I walked away, right? You can celebrate those wins. You can celebrate doing something different. You can even celebrate remembering to do something different. You can celebrate remembering that a new pattern was available to you, and even trying and, taking a baby step towards it. This totally works. Every old pattern that I have changed has been the steps. And then, of course, the last step is maintenance, settling into the new self-concept, but starting to believe that you are that new person who's doing new things, reminding yourself and loving yourself when you have slip-ups. So that's just maintaining after you've imbibed the new pattern. Everything that has changed in my life after my divorce has come through just changing patterns. And I'm still changing some patterns. There was a period where I had to change my parenting patterns, where I was like, okay, let's look at how I'm parenting. Would I be parenting this way if I hadn't been in that marriage? Is this really the way I want to show up? Is this the way I want to parent? And that actually came into play because my kids were growing up. They were teenagers, and they started becoming young adults. And I was like, okay, well, some things were good when they were teenagers, a lot of boundaries that I set to keep them safe. And I was like, now they're young adults, that doesn't apply anymore. And it was hard to break those habits. I was accustomed to telling them what to do. I was accustomed to being the parent and feeling like I was right. But I was like, even if I am right, they're adults now. I can't parent them like I parent the 16-year-old or the 15-year-old. It's completely different worlds. And so I had to go through this same process just in the last couple of years to rewire the way I talk to them, the way I approach them. I had to infuse a whole lot of respect, because they're adults now. They own their decisions. I had to step away and not give so much advice. It was like a whole thing. So I had my own old pattern and I had to create a whole new pattern of relating to my young adults as adults. And so this applies in so many ways. It really is the stuff of life. It is the stuff of growth in any area, whether it's your money, it is your career, it is dating, it is relating to people in your life, your ex, your health. All of it comes down to this. Okay, that was the webinar. I hope you enjoyed that and that was useful for you. If you are dating after divorce, I want to invite you to schedule a consultation call with me. The link to do this is in the show notes. We talk for about 45 minutes on a Zoom call about your dating journey and what's happening there. We look at where the problems are and we put together some solutions for you. So go ahead and click on that link to schedule your consultation call with me, and I look forward to meeting with you. Right. Thanks for your time and attention, and I will see you next time.